To start doing calligraphy, you need to do a little bit of practice, just getting used to the calligraphy pens, the nibs, and the India ink. These are calligraphy pens. They're the old style pens that you would use to dip into ink. The tip of the pen is called the nib, and those come in many different sizes. Some are a thicker nib and some are thinner. And there are also plastic or wooden pens. And this is the India ink that we will be using to do our calligraphy in class. I like to have a little tray or a lid to set my ink on, and then you'll want to shake your ink just a little bit and pull the eyedropper out of the ink, and you can set that down on the lid or the tray. So I keep that there just in case I do have a spill, then I can easily clean it up. It doesn't get on the table and saves me some time and money. Now with the calligraphy practice sheet, you just need to write your name at the top, and it asks you to start experimenting with different marks using the calligraphy pen. So there are some examples there just to give you some ideas of things that you can do. And I encourage you to experiment with different sizes of pen nibs. Try out the thicker ones, try out the thinner ones, and see what kind of marks you can make, what kind of patterns you can do, different designs you can try, and test out how it looks when you are starting from the top and from the bottom. When you're doing calligraphy, one of the most important things is wrist control. So it's like when you were learning to hand write, only this is a little different. If you keep your wrist from moving and only move your actual arm itself, it's going to make doing calligraphy a lot easier. It's going to give it that classic calligraphy look. And so if you want to do a nice job with the calligraphy, you're going to want to make sure you keep your wrist still. Imagine that your wrist is fused to your entire arm, and that's going to help quite a bit when you're doing calligraphy writing. Now I'm going to test out my smaller nib. So this one's a lot smaller. This one, it doesn't matter as much how still I keep my wrist. I can move my wrist quite a bit. The thickness is always going to be the same. And this is really good for really small details or doing some cross-hatching, smaller designs. Now I'm going to start by practicing copying the letters below that little experimental mark section. So I'm practicing making my letters and using the middle line as a guide for the size. So the letters that you copy are going to be a lot bigger, or not a lot bigger, but a little bigger than your original letters. And really focus on keeping your wrist still. You're not going to be moving your wrist around quite a bit. It's going to be more your arm and your hand moving rather than your wrist. And that's going to keep the calligraphy looking the correct way, and you're going to get the thin parts and the thick parts where you need them. So I'm just following along, and if you need to go back and go over a section, that is totally fine. This is practice, so it's not going to be perfect, obviously. It's going to take some time getting used to using the pen and getting used to using that India ink. One word about India ink, it is permanent. It will stain, so please be careful. Avoid getting it on your clothes, and try to avoid getting it on the table as well. When you're all done, you can put it in your drawer to dry. Now, this calligraphy challenge is a great way to learn how to create many different letter styles using India ink and the pens. And we have many different font examples that you can use as a reference. The instructions for this calligraphy challenge ask you to create an entire alphabet set, and each letter needs to be a different font, so a different style of writing. And so I'm going to start out with an A that has a lot of swirls in it, and it's a little bit more of an abstract A. It's not going to be a perfectly Times New Roman font type A. And you can do any kind of font you want. It might not even be very readable, and that's okay. A lot of times graffiti fonts are a little bit more abstract. They're not going to be like your traditional font, and that is just fine. The main purpose of this assignment is to get you used to working with the pen and ink, and also for you to explore the different lines and the different designs you can do with that ink. And there are many, countless ways to use the ink pen to create different designs and different fonts. So with this assignment, you're going to be trying to create a different font for every single letter, which as you go, it might be a little bit of a challenge. So that's why I have those reference fonts for you to look at. If you get stuck, you can take a look at those and maybe try and copy one of those or make up your own font based on one of those references. So now the video is sped up just a little bit. I'm going to test out some different nibs. So I'm testing out a thinner nib, which is going to give me a very thin line. And so you can test out the thin ones and the thick ones, decide which ones you like better, and just kind of experiment with the different line qualities and the different widths of the ink. You can also add some patterns to make your fonts different. So if it seems similar to another font, you can always go back and add some different patterns. You can always go back and make the line thicker and just kind of change it up, making sure that it's different. If you ever get like an ink blot on your page, it's not a huge deal. That just means that you're probably using too much ink. You might be dipping the ink or dipping the pen into the ink a little bit too far. So if you do experience that, try using a little bit less ink on your pen. You will notice that you have to keep going back and dipping the pen back in. That's how people used to write. We didn't always have ballpoint pens. We used to have to write like this. But calligraphy is a great art form for creating different artworks that use words, but also uses artistic principles like line and texture and pattern and balance. And it's a great way to practice those skills as well. And I'm almost there. I'm starting to look at all those fonts for ideas because I'm starting to struggle. I'm trying to make sure that each font looks a little different. You could also combine the sizes, so if you want to do an outline of a letter using a thicker nib and then maybe using the thin nib to create designs on the inside, you can try that as well. And then when you are all finished for the day, you'll just put this in your drawer to dry, and we'll be starting our next project shortly.